Hello, it's 22 hours GMT in Accra, 1 a.m. in Moscow, Russia, and also 1 a.m. in Ankara, Turkey. It's 5 p.m. in Austin, Texas, USA. From the News Hub here in Accra, Desawe Kanda, I'm Stephen NT, and this is NEWSAT10. We'll begin with taking a look at some of the day's major news highlights. And President Akufo-Addo says the fastest way to resolve the country's economic challenges is through entrepreneurship and effective economic development. Speaking at the presidential pitch for startups in Accra, the president reiterated government's resolve to support the growth of businesses. And Vice President Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia has called for competitiveness and transparency in awarding of contracts. Opening a procurement conference in Accra, he expressed concern over the high cost of projects under the previous administration, which he said is affecting the national budget. About 150 squatters occupying a piece of land at Kaukudi in Accra have been evicted to allow traders at the Arts Center to relocate there. This is to pave way for the construction of the new Arts and Crafts Village under the Marine Drive project. The Tema Oil refinery toll had shut down again following shortage of crude oil at the facility. The refinery, which has been producing which has the capacity to refine about 45,000 barrels of crude oil a day, has been operating below capacity for some time now. TV3 checks reveal the refinery is unable to raise letters of credit to procure crude oil. On the international front, traders at Tehran's Grand Bazaar have taken part in a big protest against rising prices and the plummeting value of Iran's currency. Shops were shut and thousands of people took to the streets of the capital. Riot police later fired tear gas to disperse the demonstrators as they marched towards Parliament. Right, those are our major news highlights. Remember, you can hear us on 3FM 92.7 and we're streaming live on our Facebook page and on 3news.com. Let's start with our very first story now. The Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, has called for competitiveness and transparency in the award of contracts. Opening a procurement conference in Accra, he expressed concern over the high cost of projects under the previous administration, which he says is affecting the national budget.
The Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, expressed disappointment over the inflating of the cost of projects, which he said seriously affected the national budget. He expressed shock at the $25 million cost of an 80-bed district hospital put up between 2014 and 2016, and cited 150-bed hospital funded by the African Development Bank over the same period at the cost of $3 million. The Vice President again alluded to a 1,000-bed hospital constructed by businessman Aliko Dangote at $20 million.
Are believed to be in excess of those accepted in the sub-region and globally. For instance, a comparative analysis reveals that better quality hospitals are currently built at more cost-effective rates in places like India than in Ghana.
He urged government appointees to ensure value for money.
We want to come out following this conference with standard designs for schools, for hospitals, and roads with their accompanying bills of quantities. We should therefore be able to set maximum costs for constructing a district hospital or a 6-unit classroom block as a guide through to the procurement process.
The Minister of Finance, Ken Oforiatta, called on chief directors at the various ministries to scrutinize projects before approval.
If the answer is no, and you are also agitating for salary increases, and then of course the justification, well, this is what AESL brought us. And I'm saying, well, fundamentally, would you spend this type of money for your own house? And if it's no, why are we extending it to government?
Senior Minister Yaosafo Mafo urged the Finance Ministry to ensure timely release of funds for value for money.
If between 2-3 officers, assuming the money is available, and they delay in the processing between Minister of Education and Minister of Finance for 1 month on a project of that size, you are adding 1/12 of the 2.5 million, and you're adding 208,000 cedis or $1,000, depending on which currency. How much do you earn? So delays cost money to Ghana.
The Value for Money conference was to set up standards for proposed government's projects. Other discussions centered on conducting risk assessment for various contracts.
Meanwhile, a former Minister of Health who served under the NDC from May 2015 to January 2017 has described claims by the Vice President that some district hospitals were overpriced as unfounded. He spoke with Abu Issa Mone on News 360 earlier.
A comparison of this nature is unfortunate because it doesn't give enough detail. You can purchase a vehicle, which is a 1.6 engine, and you get a similar model, same looking vehicle, which is a 3-liter engine, with completely different pricing. But if you look at the two vehicles, face value, they look the same. So it is what goes into the hospital that matters. And you have to look at it. Even in his rendition, if you listen to Dr. Bawumia himself, he did make mention that he was giving quoting figures without the cost of equipment, and gave a rough figure of what that equipment cost. He didn't talk about access roads. He didn't talk about issues to deal with accommodation for the staff that work at any given hospital. And so to make comparisons without looking at the separate contracts separately to see what has actually gone into those contracts is not the way to go. And we therefore would give you figures which do not actually make what's for good reading if you don't have a good comparison. And therefore, I would have hoped that this type of comparison would have been left to the serial callers and not at the level at which we are dealing with it here. You should come out with the ADB hospital, give the details, and then look at the hospitals we have built. Bearing in mind that the Dodowa Hospital, which is one of the hospitals we built and commissioned, has now been declared by WHO as what should be the standard norm for hospitals in terms of district hospitals, and is going to be should be brought out Africa-wide. And therefore, with that kind of commendation, we should be careful how we knock what has been done. That is not to say that a general situation of looking for value for money is not being condemned, but when you try to link it to your previous government and what has happened, then we have concerns.
All right, let's get on to the telephone lines. Dr. Gideon Boakon is the spokesperson for the Vice President, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. Good evening, Doc, and thank you very much. Alex Segbafia, you heard him a while ago. I'm sure you were listening. He says these kinds of comments are left for foot soldiers, serial callers, more than someone like a Vice President. Your quick reaction before we go into the substance of the issues for tonight.
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. Let me state that, first and foremost, the Vice President did not in any way seek to impugn the kind of motive that Mr. Alex Segbafia is bringing on board into this whole discussion. What the Vice President did was, as part of the Value for Money conference in his remarks, admonish the participants and stakeholders who had met that they should keep in mind that there is a need to ensure value for money for government contracts, and that he made mention of the fact that government at some point in time built a district hospital at the cost of $25 million. And also the African Development Bank, through a contractor, executed a contract on behalf of government African Development Bank, has also indicated that they had built about $150 million facility hospital. Of course, that was without equipment at the cost of somewhere $1.3 million. And so the Vice President said that if these two figures are anything to go by, then clearly indicates that there is cause for worry, and that is why he is admonishing.
Right. So, Doc, let's stay with this. Let's stay with this $25 million district hospital that the Vice President made mention to. Was there a specific hospital that he was referring to? I mean, so we could put the hospital to the amount it cost to build it. Would you know?
No, you know, because the Vice President wanted to depoliticize the whole thing and didn't want to make it become a feud between NPP and DC. First, he decided not to mention under which political regime this hospital was even constructed. And second, he decided not to mention names. But these are hospitals that were presented to us by the ministry. Right. And so these are there. And that's why Mr. Sabefia is talking about it. But the Vice President wanted to depoliticize it. He wanted people who are apolitical people to think through the matter. So the import of what he was trying to drive home at was not to compare one political party to the other, but rather to say that we as a government is a continuous process. We have built hospitals at this cost, but the private agency has been able to do it that much without mentioning any political regime. So he wanted them to avert their minds to these two contrasts and the disparities in the cost, so that going forward we can think around how best we can ensure for money for government contracts. So there shouldn't be any need for any politicization of it, because the Vice President wanted to be a statesman and he decided not to politicize the whole thing. That is why he did not even mention.
He also did mention that these overpriced contracts are affecting the national budget. Are you able to throw some light on that in particular?
Yes, because, sometimes the overpricing of contracts, as I learned today from the experts, do not actually happen at the time of the award of the contract. Sometimes along the lines, when government has not even budgeted for some other contingency costs, contractors and engineers will raise other certificates and come and say that, oh, we even made a mistake at the time of the award of the contract. These are additional costs that have come on board. And because government has not budgeted for this and government wants the contract executed for the people, government will have to find money to finance something that he had not budgeted for. And this can throw the budget into disarray. And that affects government finances and also bring on board the issue of deficit, because we have to spend more than what he had budgeted for. So these are not good for any country at any moment in time. That is why it is so good at this particular point in time, even though it is delayed. I mean, should have had this long ago. And because the President and the Vice President are committed to ensuring that we get value for money, as they used to talk about in opposition, it is good that today we have a government that says that let us all sit around the table, experts, academia, civil society organizations, journalists, contractors, government. How can we best work around our contracting processes to ensure value for money and make sure that the public purse is protected? And that is exactly what the Vice President did today, over 8 hours of sitting in such discussions with the movement into together with other government officials. We believe that with this, we can leapfrog and move forward and make sure that we get value for money for government contracts going forward. Right.
Doc, I must say that the Vice President did indeed make reference to the previous administration in his comment. But the general saying is that if you inherit a poor economy, you fix it. If you inherit a broken system, you fix it. So what is this government doing really to fix this problem? You're telling us that you inherited overpricing of contracts. I'm sure that you can go through the necessary processes in order to clean things out. Can you?
Thank you very much for this. And I think part of the Fix It solutions is what this government has done today. You need to meet at a point in time to have proper introspection of what has happened and look forward to see how the future will hold. So what is good now is that government at a point in time has realized that we need to put a stop onto this. Let us have a cap for government contracts. If it is a kilometer of road, how much are we constructing it for? If it is 6 unit classroom blocks, how much are we constructing? Let us put this in ink and let everybody come to the understanding that if you're a contractor and you accept to construct, let's say, 6 unit classroom block, this is how much government is willing to pay. No more negotiations, no more up and down in the pricing. So that we have a uniform price across board, and we define government projects. 6 unit classroom block in Yamuransa should be the same as 6 unit classroom block in Odododo, so that we have that consistency and uniformity in the execution of government contracts.
Right, Dr. Boako, we're extremely grateful for your time. Thank you very much. Dr. Gideon Boako is a spokesperson for Vice President Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. I'm Stephen Anti. This is News at 10. We have more news for you. Please stay. Welcome back. Now, the Criminal Justice Reform Association has called on the Attorney General and Minister for Justice, Gloria Kufu, as a matter of urgency to set up a team to develop a manual or some form of guidelines for pre-trial disclosures, among others. The Supreme Court, in the case of the Republic versus Eugene, Bafo-Boni, and 4 others, upheld the right of accused persons being tried to have access to all documents in the possession of the prosecution, irrespective of whether the prosecution intends to rely on them or not. The Supreme Court was, however, quick to point out that the ruling was not absolute, but subject to a number of exceptions. In a statement released by the Criminal Justice Reform Association, signed by private legal practitioner Martin Pebu, the group said it was a huge step in the right direction and commended the justices for their wisdom. Tonight, I'm privileged to have been joined in the studio by Martin Pebu, the man who signed this document, and we'll have here to have an interesting conversation. Good evening, sir. Thank you. We're privileged to have you here. So first, let us understand what these pre-trial processes are, or really what a pre-trial process is. And then we'll follow up from how come people who are standing trial would need the documents that the opponent is using against them before the case is heard. Okay, so this is what it is. Let's say from the when a suspect is brought into the police station, okay, for investigations into an alleged crime, among others, you give statements to the police. The police will require him to give a statement of what he knows about the crime. And even before he comes in, the person who reported would have given a statement. You remember the recent number 12 Anas expose, the president wrote to the CID. So those documents and many others, medical reports and all those things, are things that the prosecution usually gather in order to prosecute. But until this Supreme Court decision, for over 99% of the crimes in Ghana, you wouldn't have an accused and his lawyer wouldn't have access to this until the trial started. Then the police would either tuck it under their armpits or hold it to their chest, whichever rendition you want, and then bring out the evidence one after the other, what we call ambush litigation. Yeah. So what the Supreme Court effectively did is to more like make ambush litigation a disincentive. Exactly. So this is a huge revolution, huge one. We must commend the court. And pre-trial disclosures, are they common in our jurisdiction, justice system here? Ghana, yeah, we do it for just less than 10 offenses. Less than 10. I'm not even sure I can count up to 7. Murder, manslaughter, rape. You say, yeah, then possession of firearms without license. These are the ones I can remember. And even if that's not all, I'm not sure you can mention any more. So effectively, the ruling, the Supreme Court is saying that it should apply to everything. Exactly. Although the exemptions that the Supreme Court may reference to, we're not sure what these exemptions are. What are they? Those are very sensitive information. So it's information of very, as I say, very sensitive nature, like national security, please. And when we say national security, it's not everything that qualifies. It has to be extremely sensitive. You remember in a few years ago, about 2 years ago, Margaret Bonful and others, when the Gitmo agreement, the Attorney General at the time said, no, this is sensitive national security. They will not disclose it. Yet when he went to the court said, no, disclose it. You say it. So when it's extremely sensitive, you don't disclose, but the prosecution will then have to go to the judge. Okay, then the judge will look at it and determine. And natural fact, when it's even national security, by our constitution, it has to go way to the Supreme Court. Once you say it's national security, then it's the Supreme Court alone that can look at it and determine. So the key thing is that we shouldn't bandy the word national security about and label everything national security. So Mr. Kwewu, tell me how crucial a guideline will be for pre-trial disclosures and how crucial it will be for our justice system. Okay, good. You see, an overwhelming majority
of the prosecutors in Ghana today are not lawyers. They are policemen. They are not lawyers. So they need to be guided. So now that the Supreme Court is raising a decision, it's good that we take it. And even the Supreme Court decision itself, they said, look, we cannot list all the items, all the evidence, all the documents that you should give to an accused before the trial starts. We can only give you lay down the main principles.
So a manual will be very important to the processes of it.
If you compare to a lot of the developed countries, that is what they do.
That is what is done.
They have even gone, some are in their 4th editions, and then the courts will look at the manual. Sometimes the judges find mistakes in the manual, then they point out to the Attorney General, no, this thing you have in your manual is a mistake, then the Attorney General.
Right. So in reference to the police prosecutors, it's been 6 months since the Criminal Justice Reform Association, you submitted a petition to the Attorney General over police prosecutors. You want police prosecutors phased out.
Yes,
why?
No, you see, that's not their job. That's the simple thing. That is not their job. For
whose job is it then?
It's the Attorney General, and the Attorney General has to appoint competent lawyers. We are a middle
not police officers.
Yes, no police officers. You know, even police officers, we don't even have even the requisite number of policemen. We have just about half of what we need. You know, we should have 1 police officer to 500 citizens. We are doing about 1 police officer to 900. So there's already a deficit there. Then you take quite a chunk of them and bring them into court as prosecutors. So that's depleting.
But if police officers are phased out in the prosecution system, do we have enough lawyers to fill this gap? I mean, considering all the conditions and restrictions that are in place now for legal training?
I believe we will get enough. I believe we will get enough, because even sometime in April or so, the AG stated that she needs about 300 lawyers. So currently, if the AG wants 300 lawyers, she will get.
I'm afraid we have to run and make way for our sports team to bring Russia Daily. I'm Stephen Enti. That's where we wrap up with News at 10. Thank you very much for staying with us on behalf of the crew. Good night. Up next is Russia Daily with our sports team, Michael Otieje and his friends. Good evening. Good night.